Hi everyone, welcome to the third video of this series, Judging Diagonals. In the past two videos, you will have learned about identifying extensions and judging extensions from closing teams against their opening teams. In this video, we will talk about comparing OG against CO and OO against CG. First, we will look at direct engagement, followed by indirect engagement before considering two scenarios. What happens when closing runs an analytical extension on material that their top half is already winning, and what happens when closing attempts to shift the frame of the debate away from opening. On to engagement, direct and indirect. One tricky aspect of diagonal comparisons is the fact that opening half teams are unable to directly respond to closing half teams. Of course, this doesn't mean that closing half teams automatically win. The judges must, of course, avoid random bonuses to opening or closing half teams, awarding debates based on role fulfillment instead of comparisons, or introducing arbitrary adjustments to deal with the lack of opportunity to engage. Instead, judges need to look at direct and indirect engagement. On direct engagement, is closing half actually responding to the opening half, or are they simply shutting opening half out of the debate and refusing to engage? Evaluating this is fairly similar to evaluating any other bilateral clash you might encounter within the round. You can consider the following questions. Did the closing half team respond at all to the opening half team? And if they did not respond, did they give a reason to believe that opening half's material was not worth responding to? Keep in mind that not responding to opening half's material does not necessarily mean opening half has fallen out of the debate. Second, did closing respond to opening half's case charitably? In essence, are they responding to opening half's best case rather than a strawman version of it? And last of all, if they are responding and if their responses are charitable, are they actually sufficient to everything that the opening half team has brought? There is a tendency to simplify opening cases when responding, or respond only to selective portions sometimes. And a common judging mistake is to let opening half claims fall out of the debate without considering what remains unresponded to after CO has spoken. And I think judges sometimes note that CO has responded and maybe wants some portions without considering necessarily what is left after these responses have taken place. Here, it is also useful to recall that even if the closing team provides direct refutation to the opening team, this refutation may not be entirely successful. The refutation may be mitigatory, or it may not do anything at all to take down the opening team's case. So always ask yourself, what did that response do, and to what extent was it effective? Points of information constitute another form of direct engagement between opening and closing teams, and can be especially important in closed rounds. Judges are expected to track and evaluate the quality of points of information and POI responses just as they would any other piece of engagement in the debate. The failure to accept a POI indicates a reduced level of engagement. If a closing half speaker consistently refuses to take POIs from a top half team or vice versa, this represents a missed chance to directly engage with a team they might be in close contention with. Keep in mind that points of information often serve as direct refutation to whatever case is being currently presented, or they might also serve to point out an overlooked assumption within the debate. These are useful in considering how teams weigh against each other, especially in closed rounds and especially on diagonals. Second, judges need to consider indirect engagement. To what extent has opening half preempted closing's responses? Here, judges must compare arguments based only on what was said in the debate. They cannot complete arguments for opening half teams by saying, well, OO was very good. Had they been able to respond to CG, surely they would have said this, which would in turn have beaten CG's arguments. Instead, they must consider, does openings material engage with closings? Were openings arguments analytically robust and substantive enough to stand up to closing's responses? Keep in mind that opening does not have to explicitly flag their material as preemptive for you to consider it so. While some teams do say something along the lines of, and even if CG runs this extension, our material still beats it because of insert reason here, judges should not make the mistake of only considering explicitly signposted material as preemptive. A very common mistake here, I think, is to overlook framing and policy work done by top half teams in comparison to bottom half teams. And it's important to also consider to what extent closing's material has been framed out of the debate by existing weighing done by opening half. That covers how we evaluate direct and indirect engagement between opening and closing teams on the diagonal. Now, I want to discuss two additional scenarios. First, what happens on the diagonal if your opening is already winning the top half and you have an analytical extension as opposed to a wholly new one. And second, what happens on the diagonal if top half agrees on a framework and the closing team then brings in a new framework. In the first scenario, imagine the following. OG is beating OO. CG has provided an analytical extension to OG's already winning material. First, you should follow the steps in the previous video in this series to identify what exactly CG is adding to the case from OG, whether it is an important link or mechanism that significantly strengthens OG's material, or if it is a fairly trivial addition, and then you evaluate this material. Next, you should consider exactly why you think OG is beating OO at this point. Is it that OO has provided no responses whatsoever to OG's winning material? Because if this is the case, then it seems highly unlikely that their case will be implicitly responsive to CG's extension on this material, especially if CG's extension was substantial. On the other hand, OG could be winning because OO has provided some fairly well-analyzed responses or arguments that nevertheless do not overcome OG's analytical rigor. And if that is the case, then how well does OO's existing material stack up against CG's extension? It is possible for OO to beat CG in this scenario if CG is only providing a trivial analytical extension and OO has sufficiently strong preemptive material, even if this material is not strong enough to beat OG. In the second scenario, imagine the following. OG and OO have had an analytically rigorous exchange focusing primarily on practical impacts, and CG shifts the framing. They disagree with the opening half on what is important without disputing the truth value of OG's or OO's frameworks or any of the claims they've made. Here, we must first evaluate whether the new focus adds something significant to the debate. So take a motion like this House would ban cigarettes. OG and OO have discussed the practical reasons for and against banning cigarettes, and CG says, all of these practical reasons in opening half are contingent on governments being legitimate and having the authority to ban things. And then they give an extension explaining why governments can enact bans if they want to. In this case, CG has tried to shift the framing of the debate, but they have not done so in a way that substantively adds to the debate as it has occurred. CO could attempt to do something similar as well. They might argue that a government is illegitimate in enacting such a ban. In this case, the evaluation of whether or not the change in framing from CO is relevant or significant might very well be different from whether the change in framing from CG is relevant or significant. The takeaway here is that closing teams do not win just because they have brought a new focus. They cannot automatically dismiss the original focus of the debate. Of course, this doesn't mean opening half's focus automatically wins just because they brought it up first either. Here, judges should refer to the weighing done by teams to explain the relevance of their cases in the following order. Explicit weighing, followed by implicit weighing inherent in the assumptions of each team's case. And as a last resort, judges should prioritize clashes in framing based on what the average reasonable person would take to be important. It is useful to note here that what is important for the average reasonable person should not be too divorced from reality, and they will tend to mirror what we see in the real world. If a team or a judge says that a clash or a framing is important, it should be, on some level, be because of what the real world looks like. So this video has covered direct engagement, followed by indirect engagement, before considering two scenarios. What happens when closing runs an analytical extension on material that their opening is already winning, and what happens when closing attempts to shift the frame of the debate away from opening. The next video will cover what is and isn't legitimate in whip speeches and how we evaluate whip speeches in debates. So thank you for your time and for watching this video series. We hope that it's been helpful for you.